"Remove him from this courtroom. He does not belong here." Those words echoed through the room before anyone understood the mistake that had just been made. The morning inside the county courthouse began like any other day. Lawyers prepared their documents, citizens waited quietly for their cases, and the familiar sound of footsteps filled the halls. Everything appeared normal until Sheriff Richard Caldwell walked through the courtroom doors. He carried the confidence of someone who was used to being obeyed. His badge represented authority, and he believed that authority gave him complete control of every situation he entered. Standing near the front of the courtroom was a quiet man reviewing papers before the day's proceedings began. He was dressed simply, carrying himself with patience and focus. His name was Marcus Whitfield. To anyone passing by, he looked like another person preparing for a busy morning. There was nothing about his appearance that immediately revealed the years of dedication behind him. There was no announcement, no introduction, no obvious sign of the position he held. Sheriff Caldwell looked at Marcus and made an assumption based only on what he could see. He did not know that the man standing in front of him was not a visitor. He did not know that Marcus was the chief judge responsible for overseeing the very courtroom where this moment was unfolding. He only saw someone he believed did not belong. Marcus noticed the misunderstanding, but he did not respond with anger. He did not raise his voice or attempt to prove himself through his title. Instead, he remained calm. That calmness came from decades of experience in the legal system and a lifetime dedicated to understanding the importance of fairness. Marcus Whitfield had learned that true authority did not come from demanding respect. It came from earning it through actions, decisions, and integrity. For years, he had worked toward one goal: making sure the law protected people equally. He understood that every person who entered a courtroom carried a story that others could not see. Now, in that same courtroom, he found himself facing a moment where someone was judging him without knowing his story. Imagine standing in a place where justice is supposed to be protected, yet someone decides your value before knowing your identity. Imagine having the power to reveal the truth instantly but choosing patience because you understand that character speaks louder than a title. That was Marcus Whitfield. He did not need to announce who he was. He believed the truth would always find its way forward. Around the courtroom, several people began noticing something unusual. The attorneys were quiet. The staff members exchanged uncertain looks. Something about the situation did not feel right. They recognized Marcus's confidence and the respect others naturally showed toward him. But Sheriff Caldwell remained focused on his own assumptions. He believed he was protecting the authority of the courtroom, unaware that he was questioning the very person entrusted with protecting that authority. The moment was only beginning, and the truth behind the quiet man standing before him was about to transform everything inside that courtroom. The courtroom remained quiet after the unexpected exchange between Sheriff Richard Caldwell and Marcus Whitfield. To everyone watching, something about the moment felt unusual. The sheriff appeared certain of his decision, while Marcus remained calm in a way that made people wonder what he knew that others did not. Marcus did not rush to defend himself. He did not interrupt. He simply stood with the same patience he had carried throughout his entire career. That patience was not a sign of weakness. It was the result of years spent understanding people, conflict, and the responsibility that came with the law. Sheriff Caldwell believed he was protecting the order of the courtroom. He believed his position gave him the authority to decide who belonged and who did not. But he had made a mistake that many people make when they judge a situation too quickly. He had confused what he could see with what was actually true. Marcus Whitfield understood that difference better than most. Long before he became the chief judge of the county court, Marcus had spent years learning every side of the legal system. He knew what it meant to stand before people who made assumptions without knowing the full story. He knew that justice required more than rules written on paper. It required patience, fairness, and the ability to listen before making decisions. That belief shaped every part of his career. Marcus never searched for power. He accepted responsibility. To him, the courtroom was not a place where one person stood above another. It was a place where every person deserved to be heard. As the moment continued, people inside the courtroom began paying closer attention. The attorneys, court staff, and visitors noticed that Marcus carried himself differently from someone who had nothing to do with the proceedings. There was a quiet confidence in the way he spoke and the way he waited. He did not appear confused. He did not appear nervous. He appeared like someone who understood exactly where he was. Meanwhile, Sheriff Caldwell remained focused on his own perspective. He saw a person who did not match the image he expected. He saw someone he believed needed to explain why he was there. But he did not see the years of dedication behind Marcus's calm expression. He did not see the countless hours spent studying law, serving communities, and protecting the principles of justice. Imagine having a lifetime of achievements hidden behind a quiet appearance. Imagine standing in a room where people underestimate you, yet choosing not to react because you understand that truth does not need to fight for attention. That was Marcus Whitfield's approach. He knew that revealing his identity would change the entire atmosphere instantly, but he also knew the greater lesson was not about proving who he was. It was about recognizing how easily people can be judged before their stories are known. The courtroom began to feel different. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with curiosity. People were starting to realize that the man Sheriff Caldwell wanted removed was not an outsider at all. He was connected to the very foundation of the courtroom itself. And as the truth slowly moved closer to being revealed, the balance of authority inside that room was about to change forever. Long before Marcus Whitfield ever sat behind the judge's bench, he learned that justice was not built on appearances. It was built on patience, preparation, and the willingness to understand every side of a story. His journey to becoming the chief judge of the county court was not created by a single achievement. It was shaped by years of dedication, difficult decisions, and a commitment to making the legal system serve the people fairly. Growing up, Marcus understood that trust was something earned over time. He watched how quickly people could form opinions based on what they saw on the outside. That lesson stayed with him throughout his education and his legal career. He knew that every person entering a courtroom carried experiences, struggles, and circumstances that were invisible to everyone else. That understanding became the foundation of the way he approached the law. After years of studying, practicing, and serving his community, Marcus earned the respect that eventually led him to become the chief judge. But despite reaching one of the highest positions in the courtroom, he never allowed the title to change who he was. He still believed that the role of a judge was not to demand respect. It was to protect fairness. It was to listen carefully. It was to make decisions based on truth rather than assumptions. That was the mindset Marcus carried on the morning Sheriff Richard Caldwell walked into the courtroom. To many people, Marcus appeared quiet and ordinary. He was not surrounded by attention. He was not announcing his position. He was simply preparing for another day of serving justice. But Marcus understood something that many people overlooked. Real authority did not always announce itself. Sometimes, the person with the greatest responsibility was the person who needed the least recognition. As Sheriff Caldwell continued believing he had complete control of the situation, Marcus remained composed. He had spent his entire career learning how to handle pressure without allowing emotions to control his decisions. He understood that moments of misunderstanding revealed more about a person's character than moments of success. Imagine spending decades building a reputation based on fairness and integrity, only to have someone judge you within a few seconds because they do not know your story. Imagine having the power to immediately reveal every achievement you have earned, but choosing patience because you believe the truth will eventually speak for itself. That was the choice Marcus made. He was not silent because he lacked confidence. He was silent because he possessed it. Around the courtroom, people began noticing the difference between the two men. Sheriff Caldwell carried visible authority through his badge and position. Marcus carried a different kind of authority, one built through years of service and trust. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. The sheriff believed he was dealing with someone who did not belong in that courtroom. He did not realize he was standing before the very person responsible for leading it. And as the morning continued, the hidden truth about Marcus Whitfield's identity was getting closer to being revealed. When that truth finally came forward, Everyone inside the courtroom would understand that the person who had been underestimated was the person who represented the highest level of justice in the room. The courtroom remained quiet, but the feeling inside the room had changed. What Sheriff Richard Caldwell believed was a simple situation was becoming something far more meaningful. The people watching could sense that there was a story unfolding beneath the surface, a story that could not be understood by looking only at appearances. Marcus Whitfield continued standing with the same calm presence he had shown from the beginning. He did not rush to explain himself. He did not demand recognition. He simply allowed the moment to continue, knowing that truth did not need to be forced. Sheriff Caldwell, however, remained confident in his own assumptions. He believed the authority of his badge gave him the ability to decide who belonged in the courtroom and who did not. He had spent years being respected because of his position, and that experience had created a belief that his judgment was always correct. But the courtroom was about to teach him a lesson that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with responsibility. Marcus understood the difference between having authority and understanding authority. Throughout his legal career, he had seen people misuse influence when they forgot the purpose behind their role. A judge, a sheriff, or any public servant was not given power to elevate themselves above others. They were given responsibility to protect fairness and serve the community. That belief was the reason Marcus remained patient. He knew that reacting emotionally would only distract from the greater lesson. The moment was not about proving that he was important. It was about showing that every person deserved to be treated with dignity before anyone knew their title. Around the courtroom, small details began drawing attention. The attorneys noticed the respect shown toward Marcus by the court staff. The visitors noticed that he carried himself with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was standing. Even without saying much, Marcus created an atmosphere of authority that did not come from demanding attention. Came from experience. Imagine spending years building a career based on fairness, only to have someone judge you within seconds because they do not understand your background. Imagine having the ability to reveal your identity immediately, but choosing patience because you believe the truth has more power when it arrives naturally. That was the strength Marcus carried. He knew that a title could change how people treated him, but he wanted the lesson to go deeper than a simple correction. He wanted people to understand that respect should not depend on status. Sheriff Caldwell was beginning to notice that something about the situation did not match his first impression. The people around him were not reacting as they would if Marcus were an outsider. There was a level of trust and familiarity that suggested a much larger connection to the courtroom. The man he believed did not belong seemed to be the person everyone else already respected. The room became filled with quiet anticipation as the truth moved closer. The documents, records, and official details that could reveal Marcus's true identity were about to change the entire atmosphere. And when the final piece of information came forward, Sheriff Caldwell would discover that he had not removed a stranger from the courtroom. He had challenged the very person responsible for leading it. The quiet tension inside the courtroom reached a moment where everyone seemed to understand that something important was about to be revealed. Sheriff Richard Caldwell still stood with the confidence of someone who believed he had made the correct decision, but the reactions around him told a different story. The attorneys, court staff, and visitors were beginning to recognize that Marcus Whitfield was not someone who had simply walked into the wrong room. There was a level of respect surrounding him that could not be explained by appearance alone. Marcus remained calm because he knew the truth did not need to be rushed. Throughout his career, he had witnessed many moments where assumptions created misunderstandings. He had learned that the strongest response was often patience. While others focused on what they could see, Marcus focused on what was right. That principle guided every decision he made as a judge. As the details connected to Marcus began to be reviewed, the reality of the situation started becoming clear. Official records confirmed what many people in the courtroom had already suspected. Marcus Whitfield was not a visitor. He was the chief judge responsible for overseeing the very courtroom where the misunderstanding had taken place. The realization changed the atmosphere instantly. The person Sheriff Caldwell believed did not belong was actually the person entrusted with protecting the fairness and order of that courtroom. The room that had once been filled with uncertainty became filled with reflection. Sheriff Caldwell began to understand the difference between authority that is displayed and authority that is earned. His badge represented his position, but Marcus represented years of dedication to the principles of justice. One form of authority was visible. The other was built through trust. Marcus did not use the discovery of his identity as an opportunity to embarrass anyone. He did not speak with anger or seek to make the moment about himself. Instead, he remained focused on the lesson behind the situation. He understood that the greatest issue was not that someone failed to recognize his title. The greater issue was that someone had been judged before being understood. Imagine spending decades building a reputation based on fairness and service, then watching someone decide who you are before learning a single detail about your life. Imagine having the ability to immediately change the entire situation but choosing restraint because you believe dignity is more powerful than proving a point. That was Marcus Whitfield. His position gave him authority, but his character gave that authority meaning. Around the courtroom, people began seeing the situation in a completely different way. The person who appeared to have the least power in that moment was actually the person carrying the greatest responsibility. The sheriff who entered believing he controlled the room now had to reflect on the importance of understanding before acting. The truth had arrived, but the lesson was only beginning. Marcus's identity explained who he was, but the way he handled the situation revealed the kind of person he had always been. And as the courtroom prepared for what came next, everyone understood that this was no longer just about one misunderstanding. It had become a powerful reminder that true justice begins when people choose to see beyond assumptions. The courtroom remained silent after the truth about Marcus Whitfield became known. The same room where uncertainty had filled the air was now filled with a different feeling. People were no longer wondering who Marcus was. They were reflecting on how quickly assumptions had been made before anyone understood the full story. Marcus stood in the center of the moment with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning. His position had been revealed, but his attitude had not changed. He did not suddenly act more important because others finally recognized his role. He had always understood that a title was not what created respect. The way a person carried responsibility was what truly mattered. Sheriff Richard Caldwell looked at the situation differently now. The confidence he had shown earlier was replaced by quiet reflection. He began to understand that authority was not simply about having a badge or a position. Authority came with a responsibility to listen, to understand, and to treat every person fairly. Marcus knew this lesson better than anyone. Throughout his years in the legal system, he had seen how powerful first impressions could be. He had watched people make decisions based on limited information, and he had seen how those decisions could affect others. That was why he believed patience was one of the most important qualities a person could have. In a courtroom, emotions could influence decisions, but justice required careful thought. Marcus carried that same principle into this moment. He had every opportunity to use his position to make the situation about himself, but he chose a different path. He did not want the focus to be on embarrassment or blame. He wanted the focus to be on understanding. The lesson was not simply that Sheriff Caldwell had failed to recognize him. The lesson was that every person deserves dignity before their achievements are discovered. Imagine standing in a courtroom where everyone finally learns your identity after they have already formed an opinion about you. Imagine having the power to immediately change how people see you, but choosing instead to show patience because your values are more important than winning a moment. That was the choice Marcus made. His strength came from self-control, not from the ability to dominate a situation. As the courtroom continued processing what had happened, the contrast between the two men became clearer. Sheriff Caldwell had entered with visible authority. Marcus had entered with earned authority. One came from a position, the other came from years of service and trust. The difference between them was not about who had more power. It was about who understood what power was meant to represent. The court staff watched carefully as Marcus handled the situation with the same fairness he brought to every case. He did not allow personal feelings to influence his response. Instead, he treated the moment as another opportunity to demonstrate what justice should look like. Sheriff Caldwell began realizing that the person he had underestimated was the person who had spent years protecting the very principles he claimed to represent. The courtroom had witnessed a powerful reversal, but the most important part was not the discovery of Marcus's identity. It was the reminder that respect should never depend on appearances, assumptions, or titles. Because true authority is not measured by how many people must listen to you. It is measured by how you choose to treat people when you have the power to decide. The courtroom had changed in a way that nobody expected. What began as a moment of confusion had become a powerful reminder about the difference between authority and responsibility. Sheriff Richard Caldwell entered the room believing he understood the situation, but he left that moment with a completely different perspective. Marcus Whitfield remained calm throughout everything, not because the situation was easy, but because he understood the importance of controlling his response. He knew that the way people handled difficult moments often revealed more about their character than the way they handled success. As the chief judge, Marcus had spent years making decisions that affected the lives of others. He understood that fairness required patience, especially when emotions were high. That was why he refused to turn the moment into a personal victory. He did not want the courtroom to remember him because of his title. He wanted people to remember the lesson behind what happened. Sheriff Caldwell began to see that the badge he carried was not a symbol of unlimited control. It was a symbol of public responsibility. The role of a sheriff was not simply to enforce rules. It was to protect trust and serve people with fairness. That realization changed the way he viewed the situation. The person he believed needed to be removed from the courtroom was actually the person responsible for guiding the courtroom with justice. Around the room, people noticed the difference between the two forms of authority. Sheriff Caldwell had authority that was immediately visible. His uniform and badge showed his position. Marcus had authority that was revealed through years of service, decisions, and the respect he had earned from the people around him. One could be seen instantly. The other had to be discovered over time. Imagine having the ability to prove yourself in a single sentence, but choosing patience because you know your actions have already spoken for you. Imagine standing in front of people who misunderstood you, yet choosing to teach instead of embarrass. That was Marcus Whitfield. His response showed that justice was not only about decisions made from the bench. It was also about how people treated one another when the truth was not immediately visible. As the situation continued, the proper review of the incident began. The focus was not on creating revenge or humiliation. The focus was on accountability and understanding. A position of authority carried expectations, and those expectations included fairness, professionalism, and respect. Sheriff Caldwell had to face the consequences of a decision made too quickly, while Marcus demonstrated why true leadership required patience. The courtroom became a place where an important lesson was revealed. Power without understanding could create mistakes, but humility and awareness could create change. Marcus did not need to raise his voice to prove his importance. He did not need to demand recognition. His character had already shown who he was. The people in that room learned that day that the greatest leaders are not always the ones who demand attention. They are the ones who remain steady when attention arrives unexpectedly. And as the courtroom moved forward, the message became clear. True justice is not about who has the loudest voice or the strongest position. It is about who chooses fairness when given the power to decide. The days following the courtroom incident brought a different kind of attention to Marcus Whitfield and Sheriff Richard Caldwell. The story was no longer about a misunderstanding between two people. It had become a reminder of how quickly assumptions could shape a moment, and how important it was for people in positions of authority to recognize the responsibility they carried. Marcus returned to his work with the same dedication he had always shown. He did not seek recognition from the people who had witnessed what happened. He did not want praise or sympathy. For Marcus, the most important outcome was not that others learned his title. The most important outcome was that they understood a deeper lesson about respect. A person's value should never depend on how much power they appear to have. It should be recognized through the simple fact that every person deserves dignity. Sheriff Caldwell spent time reflecting on the situation. The experience challenged the way he viewed authority. For years, he had understood his role through the responsibility of maintaining order. But that day reminded him that order without understanding could lead people in the wrong direction. A position of trust required more than following procedures. It required awareness, fairness, and the willingness to see people as individuals rather than assumptions. Marcus understood that real change did not come from humiliating someone who made a mistake. It came from creating an opportunity for reflection. That was why he chose a response based on professionalism rather than anger. He believed that justice should not only correct problems. It should also help people understand why those problems happened in the first place. Imagine having every reason to respond with frustration, yet choosing to respond with wisdom instead. Imagine having the authority to make a difficult moment even harder, but choosing compassion because you believe every person has the ability to learn. That was the example Marcus wanted to set. His strength was not shown by how easily he could use his position. His strength was shown by how carefully he chose to use it. Inside the courthouse, the event became a quiet reminder for everyone who witnessed it. The lawyers, staff members, and visitors saw that leadership was not about making people feel small. Leadership was about protecting fairness even when emotions were involved. Marcus had shown that the highest form of authority was not control. It was responsibility. Sheriff Caldwell also learned that respect cannot be demanded simply because someone wears a uniform or holds a title. Respect is built through actions, decisions, and the way a person treats others when they believe nobody is watching. The moment between the two men became a lesson that extended beyond one courtroom. It showed that people often carry stories, achievements, and responsibilities that are invisible at first glance. The person who seems ordinary may have spent a lifetime accomplishing extraordinary things. As Marcus continued serving the community, he carried the same belief that guided him from the beginning. Justice was not only found in laws and decisions. It was found in how people chose to see each other. And in the end, the most powerful message from that courtroom was simple. The truth does not need to demand attention. When the time comes, it reveals itself. Years after that unforgettable day in the courtroom, Marcus Whitfield continued to serve with the same quiet dedication that had defined his entire career. The attention surrounding the incident eventually faded, but the lesson it created remained. For Marcus, the moment was never about proving that he had authority. It was about reminding people why authority exists in the first place. A position was not meant to create distance between people. It was meant to create responsibility, fairness, and trust. Every morning when Marcus entered the courthouse, he carried the same belief that had guided him for decades. Justice was not only found in the decisions written on official documents. It was found in the way people were treated before those decisions were ever made. Sheriff Richard Caldwell also carried the memory of that day with him. The experience changed the way he viewed his role and the responsibility that came with it. He learned that a uniform and a badge could show a position, but they could never replace understanding. True leadership required listening before judging and respecting people before knowing their achievements. The lesson was not simply about one mistake. It was about recognizing how quickly assumptions could influence actions and how important it was for people in every profession to look beyond first impressions. The courtroom where the misunderstanding happened became a symbol of something much larger. It represented the difference between visible power and meaningful influence. Sheriff Caldwell had entered believing that authority came from being the person in control. Marcus showed that authority came from serving others with integrity. One relied on a position, the other relied on character. Imagine a person spending an entire lifetime building trust, helping communities, and protecting the principles of fairness, only to be judged by someone who knows nothing about their journey. Imagine having the ability to reveal every accomplishment immediately, yet choosing patience because you understand that your actions already tell the story. That was the example Marcus Whitfield left behind. He showed that dignity does not disappear when someone misunderstands you. It becomes even more powerful when you choose to protect it. The people who witnessed the event remembered more than the moment of confusion. They remembered how Marcus responded. They remembered that he had every reason to focus on himself, but instead he focused on the lesson. He demonstrated that justice is not about creating winners and losers. It is about creating understanding and making sure fairness remains at the center of every decision. The story of Marcus and Sheriff Caldwell continued to remind people that appearances can be misleading and that every person carries a history that others may never see. A quiet person may carry years of achievement. A simple conversation may reveal a much larger truth. And a single moment can change the way people understand responsibility forever. In the end, Marcus Whitfield never needed to prove that he belonged in that courtroom. His actions had already answered the question long before anyone asked it. The greatest form of authority was never about forcing others to recognize your importance. It was about having the wisdom to use your influence with fairness, humility, and respect. Because true justice does not begin when people discover who holds the highest title. True justice begins when people choose to see the value in everyone before they know the title at all.